The Prosperity Colony on Kepler 186f was humanity's crowning achievement in deep space colonization. Beneath its massive geodesic domes, children played in artificial parks, while their parents worked in the advanced research facilities that dotted the landscape. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from her observatory as the colony's youngest residents chased each other through the carefully cultivated grass, their laughter carrying through the dome's acoustic channels. As the colony's chief xenobiologist, she had spent the last 5 years studying the crystalline formations that covered much of the planet's surface. These structures, while beautiful, were entirely alien, growing in patterns that defied terrestrial crystal formation theories. Still, they had seemed harmless enough, and the colony had flourished. That was about to change. The first sign came from the long-range sensors. Dr. Chen, her assistant's voice crackled through the comm. "We're detecting unusual activity in the crystal fields to the north. The formations, they're moving." Sarah rushed to her monitoring station, watching in disbelief as the crystalline structures began to shift and reorganize themselves. What they had assumed to be natural formations were revealing themselves as something else entirely. The crystals were coalescing into distinct shapes, rising from the ground like geometric giants awakening from ancient slumber. "Alert colonial security," she ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "And get me Governor Richards. Now." But it was already too late for preventative measures. The crystal entities, the Vex as they would later be known, were approaching the colony's outer perimeter. Their bodies refracted the planet's dim sunlight in mesmerizing patterns, creating cascades of color that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. 8-year-old Maya Patel pressed her face against the dome's transparent wall, fascinated by the approaching crystalline beings. Despite the colony-wide alert that had just been issued, several other children joined her, their natural curiosity overwhelming their sense of caution. The Vex, it seemed, were equally curious about the human children. One of the entities approached the dome, its crystalline form shifting and realigning until it roughly approximated a humanoid shape. It pressed what might have been called a hand against the barrier, mirroring Maya's gesture. What the Vex couldn't understand, was that their crystalline bodies existed in a state of matter that interfered with the exotic materials used in the dome's construction. The mere touch of the entity created a cascading failure in the dome's molecular structure. Sarah watched in horror as hairline fractures began spreading from the point of contact. "Maya," she screamed into her comm, "get away from the wall." But the warning came too late. The dome's integrity failed catastrophically. The explosive decompression that followed through Maya and 3 other children across the chamber before emergency force fields could engage. By the time the medical team reached them, Maya was gone, her small body broken not by the Vex's direct action, but by their fundamental ignorance of human fragility. The Vex, observing the chaos through their crystalline sensory arrays, registered confusion. Their attempt at communication had resulted in an unexpected outcome, but they didn't grasp the magnitude of what had just occurred. To them, the loss of a single organic being seemed a regrettable but minor incident. They would soon learn how wrong they were. As emergency protocols engaged and the colony mobilized its medical and security resources, Sarah Chen sent 2 messages. The first was to Earth's colonial administration, containing all their scientific data on the Vex. The second was to Maya's parents, who worked in the colony's agricultural sector. The response from Earth would take hours to arrive. But in those hours, something profound was already happening. Across the colony, humans stopped their usual squabbles and disagreements. The arbitrary divisions of nationality, religion, and politics that had followed humanity to the stars melted away. In their place arose something ancient and terrible, the unified rage of a species that had evolved as pack predators with an overwhelming drive to protect their young. The Vex, still trying to initiate what they considered proper first contact protocols, remained near the colony. They transmitted complex mathematical sequences, their standard greeting to new species. They didn't understand why their transmissions were being met with silence. They didn't understand that they had just committed the one unforgivable act in human space. They had killed a child. In the observatory, Sarah Chen watched the Vex's attempts at communication with cold eyes. As a scientist, she had always dreamed of first contact. But as she looked at the data streaming across her screens, data that showed the Vex were not malicious but simply catastrophically ignorant, she felt no excitement, only a deep, terrible resolve. Humanity had encountered hostile aliens before. They knew how to deal with enemies. But the Vex were something potentially more dangerous, a species so fundamentally different that they couldn't even comprehend the concept of protecting the young. And as Sarah composed her third message of the day, this one to Earth's Defense Council, she knew that the galaxy was about to learn why humanity's first and highest law was the protection of their children. The Vex had made a mistake, and like every species that had underestimated humanity's response to a threat against their young, they would learn that the universe's most terrifying force was not malice or power, but the love of human parents for their children. Earth's response began with silence. Across every human world, colony, and outpost, communication ceased. The usually bustling channels of interstellar commerce and cultural exchange went dark. Ships in transit maintained radio silence, responding to hails only with automated navigational beacons. The constant stream of entertainment broadcasts, scientific data, and personal messages that had defined human space fell quiet. The other spacefaring races noticed. The Arcturians, known for their extensive trade networks with humanity, found their calls for explanation met with automated responses. The Zenith Collective, humanity's closest allies, received only a brief message. We must attend to an internal matter. Stand by. But in that silence, humanity was far from inactive. Deep beneath the Olympus Mons military complex on Mars, Admiral Helena Rodriguez stood before the assembled Joint Chiefs of Earth's combined defense forces. The footage from Prosperity Colony played on the massive display behind her, showing the moment of the dome's failure in horrifying clarity. The Vex remain in orbit around Kepler 186f, she reported, her voice carrying the weight of contained fury. They continue to transmit mathematical sequences, apparently believing this to be a standard first contact scenario. General Zhang of the Asian Confederation leaned forward. And the colony? Secure, for now. Dr. Chen's quick action in raising emergency barriers prevented further casualties. But the Vex's crystalline composition makes our standard containment measures potentially unreliable. Then we need something non-standard, came a new voice. Dr. James Patel, head of Advanced Weapons Research, stepped into the chamber. His presence here was irregular. Civilian scientists rarely attended high-level military briefings. But today was different. Today, the scientist was also a father. Admiral Rodriguez nodded to him. Dr. Patel has been working on something that might be particularly relevant to our situation. Project Looking Glass. The lights dimmed as holographic schematics filled the air. They showed what appeared to be conventional warships, but with modifications unlike anything in humanity's known arsenal. We've been researching crystal-based technologies for decades, Patel explained, his voice clinical despite the personal stake he held in this mission. Mostly focused on communication and computing, but the underlying principles can be repurposed. The schematics shifted, showing weapon systems that could target the specific resonant frequencies of crystalline structures. We can shatter them, he said simply, not just their bodies, but the very lattice that makes up their consciousness. A murmur went through the assembled leaders. This wasn't just a weapon. It was potentially an extinction-level threat to the entire Vex species. The ethical implications, someone began, but Patel cut them off. They killed my daughter, he said, his professional demeanor cracking for just a moment. They killed her and don't even understand why that matters. Ethics. He laughed, a hollow sound. We're long past ethics. Admiral Rodriguez raised her hand for silence. We're not making this decision in anger, she said, though the steel in her voice suggested otherwise. The Vex represent a fundamental threat to human existence, not through malice, but through incomprehension. They cannot understand the concept of protecting the young. They cannot learn to be careful around our children because they cannot grasp why they should. She turned to face the assembled leaders. This isn't about revenge. This is about survival. We either find a way to make them understand, or we make sure they can never threaten another human child. In orbit around Earth, the massive shipyards that had been producing colony vessels and research ships underwent a rapid transformation. Hidden compartments in seemingly civilian facilities opened to reveal military-grade manufacturing equipment. Vessels under construction were quickly modified, their science labs replaced with weapon systems that had been developed in secret over decades. The other species in known space watched with growing unease as human activity shifted in ways they couldn't quite track. The Arcturians noticed that their trading partners were converting cargo holds into missile bays. The Zenith Collective observed that the human ships they could still detect were moving in coordinated patterns that suggested military maneuvers. But perhaps most telling was what was happening in human civilian sectors. Parents across human space were volunteering for military service in unprecedented numbers. Cultural differences that had caused conflicts for generations were set aside. Humanity's numerous political factions, which had squabbled over everything from resource rights to colonial governance, found themselves in perfect agreement. In her lab on Prosperity Colony, Dr. Sarah Chen received new orders. She was to continue monitoring the Vex, but now with a different purpose. Every piece of data about their crystalline structure, their methods of communication, their very nature as a species was being fed into Project Looking Glass. The Vex, still orbiting the colony and transmitting their mathematical greetings, remained oblivious to the gravity of their situation. They didn't understand why the humans had gone quiet. They didn't understand that this silence wasn't confusion or fear. It was the calm before a storm of unprecedented magnitude. They were about to learn why every spacefaring race had one rule above all others when dealing with humans: never harm their children. Not out of malice, not out of carelessness, and especially not out of ignorance. The storm was coming, and in its wake, the galaxy would never be the same. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect synchronization, their arrival rippling across space-time like a thunderclap. 300 ships, their hulls gleaming with the latest metamaterial camouflage, dropped into real space around Kepler 186f. At their head was the UES Nemesis, humanity's first Titan-class warship, commanded by Admiral Rodriguez herself. The Vex noticed immediately, their crystalline forms flickering with patterns that their observers interpreted as surprise. This wasn't the response they had expected to their mathematical greetings. In orbit around the colony, their ships began to shift, geometric patterns realigning into what they considered defensive formations. "They're transmitting again," Lieutenant Santos reported from her communication station. "More mathematical sequences, but different this time. The AA suggests they might be expressing confusion." Admiral Rodriguez stood at the bridge's center, her uniform crisp despite the weeks of preparation. "Dr. Patel, are the looking glass arrays calibrated?" From his temporary station, James Patel nodded. The weapons scientist had insisted on being present for this operation, and no one had the heart or courage to deny Maya's father his place. "All ships report ready. We can begin on your order." But Rodriguez had one more card to play. "Open a channel," she commanded. "Let's see if they can understand what they've done before we make them understand what we can do." The transmission they sent was simple. Footage from the colony, the dome's failure, Maya's death, the grief of her parents, the fury of her people. They broadcasted on every frequency, in every format they could devise, hoping that somehow the Vex would grasp the magnitude of their mistake. The crystalline ships wavered, their formation shifting in what might have been uncertainty. Their response came quickly, more mathematical proofs, followed by what appeared to be atomic diagrams of dome materials. They're trying to explain the physical properties that caused the failure. Dr. Chen's voice came through from the colony below. They still don't understand. To them, this is just a fascinating interaction of different states of matter. Rodriguez's face hardened. Then we make them understand. All ships, execute Operation Child's Dawn. Phase 1. The human fleet moved with practiced precision, forming a complex three-dimensional grid around the Vex vessels. From each ship, invisible beams of focused energy began to probe the crystalline hulls, gathering data on their exact resonant frequencies. The Vex responded with what they probably considered a peaceful gesture. Their ships began to fragment into smaller crystalline forms, perhaps attempting to demonstrate their nature more clearly. They didn't realize they were only making Project Looking Glass's targeting more precise. All ships report frequency matches locked in, Patil announced. His hands hovered over the controls, trembling slightly. Ready for Phase 2. Rodriguez took a deep breath. This wasn't just about punishment or revenge. This was about ensuring that no species would ever again risk human children through ignorance or carelessness. Begin broadcast. Every ship in the human fleet began transmitting on the exact frequencies that would resonate through Vex crystalline structures. But they weren't trying to shatter them. Not yet. Instead, they sensed something more fundamental: the neurological patterns of human grief, fear, and parental protective instincts, translated into frequencies the Vex could feel in every facet of their being. For the first time in their ancient history, the Vex experienced emotion. Their ships writhed in space, geometric patterns spinning in chaotic arrays as alien feelings crashed through their crystalline consciousness. They felt the terror of a child in her last moments. They experienced the soul-crushing grief of parents losing their offspring. They understood, finally and terribly, what they had done. Their transmission changed. Gone were the mathematical sequences. Instead, their signals pulsed with patterns that the ship's AI translated with growing certainty: horror, regret, understanding. They're attempting to reconfigure their molecular structure, Chen reported from her instruments. The patterns, they're trying to make themselves less dangerous to organic life. They're trying to change their fundamental nature. Rodriguez watched the alien ship's desperate attempts at transformation with cold satisfaction. Hold Phase 2 for another 30 seconds, she ordered. Let them feel it. Let them understand exactly why every species in this galaxy will know what happens when you harm a human child. The Vex's attempts at communication became more frantic. Apologies in mathematics, in physics, in crystalline resonance. Promises encoded in molecular structures. Offerings of knowledge, technology, servitude. Finally, Rodriguez gave the order to stand down. The resonance attack ceased, leaving the Vex ships hovering in space, their crystalline forms now permanently altered by the experience of human emotion. Transmit the terms, she commanded. The message was simple. The Vex would rebuild the Prosperity Colony's dome. Using new materials they would develop that could safely interact with both organic and crystalline life. They would establish protocols for handling soft-bodied species, especially their young. And they would carry forward the memory of what they had felt today, sharing it with every species they encountered. As the Vex frantically signaled their acceptance, Rodriguez turned to Patil. "Your daughter," she said softly, "she won't be forgotten." Her death changed them, changed their entire species. No one will ever again underestimate humanity's commitment to protecting its children. Patil nodded, tears in his eyes. Maya would have been fascinated by them, he said. She always loved crystals. I wish they could have learned without her having to teach them with her life. In the colony below, Sarah Chen watched as the Vex ships began to change, their crystalline structures taking on new forms that would be safer around organic life. The price of knowledge had been steep, but the lesson would echo across the galaxy. Humanity's children were sacred, and the consequences of forgetting that would reshape worlds. News of humanity's response to the Vex incident spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. The Arcturian trading fleets, which had been anxiously monitoring human space, transmitted urgent reports back to their homeworld. The Zenith Collective's diplomatic corps worked overtime analyzing the implications. Every spacefaring race that had contact with humanity found themselves reevaluating their protocols and assumptions. The Vex themselves became unwitting ambassadors of humanity's power. Their crystalline forms, permanently altered by the resonance attack, now carried within them something unprecedented: the capacity for emotional understanding. As they encountered other species, they transmitted not just mathematical proofs and scientific data, but emotional memories of their experience with humanity. In the great archive rings of the Arcturian homeworld, the High Commerce Council convened an emergency session. Holographic displays showed the Vex ships, their once perfect geometric forms now bearing permanent alterations that seemed to ripple with emotional resonance. They didn't destroy them, Archive Master Kextal observed, their multiple appendages moving in patterns of deep concern. They could have shattered every crystalline structure in the Vex fleet. Instead, they chose to make them understand. That's what makes it so terrifying, responded Trade Director Venn. Humanity demonstrated not just the power to destroy, but the ability to fundamentally change another species' consciousness. And they did it with technology they had apparently developed years ago, just in case they needed it. The implications were staggering. How many other weapons, other technologies, had humanity developed in secret? The Arcturians had always considered themselves more advanced, viewing human trading partners as useful but technologically inferior. Now they found themselves wondering what other surprises lurked beneath humanity's seemingly straightforward exterior. Meanwhile, at the Zenith Collective's central nexus, their most advanced AI cores processed the data from Kepler 186f. The collective, which prided itself on understanding patterns of civilizational development, found itself struggling to categorize humanity's response. They achieved perfect strategic balance, the primary analysis core concluded. Maximum demonstration of power with minimum actual destruction. The emotional resonance weapon wasn't just a show of force, it was a message to the entire galaxy. The secondary analysis core added its own observation. Their protection of offspring appears to be not just a biological imperative, but a cornerstone of their civilization. We had categorized this as a cultural peculiarity. This was an error. Across known space, military strategists updated their threat assessments. Diplomatic corps revised their protocols, placing special emphasis on regulations concerning human children. Scientists who had been studying human technology with mild interest now found their research priorities suddenly shifted. But perhaps the most profound changes were happening among the Vex themselves. Their entire society was transforming, shaped by their new understanding of emotional existence. The crystalline beings who had once viewed organic life as barely worthy of notice now found themselves fascinated by the complexity of feeling. On their homeworld, a massive crystalline structure was taking shape, a memorial. Its facets were arranged to resonate with the exact emotional frequencies they had experienced during humanity's attack. Every Vex who encountered it would understand the price of ignorance, the weight of responsibility, and the terrible consequences of underestimating humanity's commitment to protecting its young. Dr. Sarah Chen, now heading an international xenological research team, visited the Vex homeworld 6 months after the incident. The changes she observed were beyond anything she had expected. They're not just adapting their behavior, she reported back to Earth. They're fundamentally reorganizing their society around their new understanding of emotion. They've developed entirely new forms of mathematics based on emotional resonance. They're teaching other crystalline species how to process feelings. The ripple effects are extraordinary. Admiral Rodriguez, reviewing Chen's report in her office on Mars, allowed herself a small smile. And the primary lesson? Absolutely clear, Chen confirmed. Every new species they contact receives an immediate emotional imprint about the importance of protecting young, especially human young. They're not just spreading the warning. They're making sure every species can feel why the warning matters. The galaxy was changing. Species that had viewed humanity as simply another spacefaring race now saw them in a different light, not as conquerors or warriors, but as something perhaps more frightening, a species that could and would reshape the fundamental nature of any civilization that threatened their children. In the Prosperity Colony, now rebuilt with new Vex design materials that were safe for both organic and crystalline life, Maya Patel's parents watched as alien children played alongside human ones. The crystalline beings, once so dangerous in their ignorance, now moved with exquisite care around their organic counterparts, their forms rippling with what had become genuine emotional concern for the young one's safety. Maya's memorial stood at the center of the colony's main dome, a cooperative creation of human art and Vex crystalline technology. When touched, it resonated with feelings of loss, love, and hope for a future where such mistakes would never again be made. It served as a reminder not just of tragedy, but of transformation, how understanding, even when forced, could bridge the gap between the most alien of species. 5 years after the Vex incident, representatives from every known spacefaring species gathered at Earth's solar assembly. The massive space station orbiting Jupiter had been specially constructed for this historic event, its architecture incorporating both human design and Vex crystalline technology. Admiral Helena Rodriguez, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, stood at the podium before the assembled delegates. Behind her, a wall-sized display showed real-time images from across human space, colonies thriving, children playing, and most notably, humans and aliens coexisting in ways that would have seemed impossible just years ago. "We gather here today," she began, "not to remember tragedy, but to ensure it never repeats. The Galactic Charter of Young One's Protection isn't just a treaty. It's a promise to every child of every species that their safety is paramount." The assembled delegates, representing everything from the crystalline Vex to the gaseous Zenith Collective, signaled their agreement in their various ways. The charter they were about to sign had been years in the making, incorporating technological safeguards, cultural exchanges, and most importantly, the emotional resonance teachings pioneered by the transformed Vex. Dr. James Patel, now heading the Interspecies Safety Commission, sat in the front row. The past 5 years had aged him, but there was peace in his eyes now. The work he'd done, translating Project Looking Glass's technology into tools for cross-species understanding, had given meaning to his daughter's sacrifice. "The Vex delegation requests permission to present," announced the Protocol I. Rodriguez nodded, and a crystalline being approached the podium. Its form was markedly different from those first Vex visitors to Prosperity Colony. Smoother, designed specifically to be safe around organic life, with emotional resonance patterns rippling visibly through its structure. "We stand as testament," the Vex representative began, its words translated both verbally and emotionally through the station's advanced systems, to the transformation that understanding can bring. "Our species once viewed the universe through the cold lens of pure mathematics. Now we see it through the prismatic spectrum of feeling." The Vex's crystalline form pulsed with complex emotional patterns that the station's systems translated for all present. Grief, gratitude, determination, hope. The death of one human child changed not just our species, but our understanding of existence itself. We carry this lesson in every facet of our being, and we share it with all we meet. From her seat in the diplomatic section, Dr. Sarah Chen watched with professional interest and personal satisfaction. Her work on human-alien relations had expanded far beyond her original xenobiological focus. The protocols she'd helped develop for first contact situations were now standard throughout known space, with special emphasis on understanding and respecting each species' approach to protecting their young. The Arcturian trade director rose next, their multiple limbs moving in formal patterns. "We once thought we understood humanity," they admitted. "We saw their emotional attachments as inefficient, their protective instincts as primitive. We were wrong. They showed us that true advancement lies not in transcending emotion, but in understanding its power." One by one, Representatives from each species came forward to sign the charter. Each signature was accompanied by a commitment, technological, cultural, or biological, to ensuring the safety of all young ones in galactic space. The Vex contributed their emotional resonance technology. The Zenith Collective offered their predictive AI systems. The Arcturians pledged their trading networks for rapid response to any threats to children of any species. As the ceremony concluded, a holographic display activated in the center of the chamber. It showed children from every represented species playing together in specially designed safe zones across multiple worlds. Among them were scenes from the new Prosperity Colony, where human children played safely with young Vex crystalline formations, each species teaching the other their ways of understanding the universe. Rodriguez's final words echoed through the chamber. Let every species remember, the protection of the young is not just a human imperative. It is the foundation upon which galactic civilization must be built. What happened at Prosperity Colony showed us the price of ignorance, but also the power of understanding. We go forward now, not in fear of what we might do to each other, but in commitment to what we can become together. In orbit around Kepler 186f, the original site of the tragedy, a new structure hung in space. Created jointly by human and Vex engineers, the Stellar Nursery was the galaxy's first multi-species children's hospital and research center. Its walls, built with evolved Vex crystal technology, could adapt to safely house young ones of any known species. In its central chamber, a memorial to Maya Patel stood as both remembrance and promise. The memorial's inscription, written in every known language and encoded in crystalline resonance patterns, read simply, "One child's life changed the galaxy. Never again shall ignorance threaten the young." In memory of Maya Patel, who taught us all to understand. And in the great darkness of space, ships of all species carried the new protocols, the new technologies, and most importantly, the new understanding. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had shown its power not just through force, but through transformation. They had taken a tragedy and turned it into a catalyst for change that would protect children of all species for generations to come. The universe would never forget the day humanity taught them the true meaning of never again.